Hey everyone, today I'll be showing off my top 5 budget decks in Lorcana. The combination of popular rare cards and limited Lorcana product have resulted in skyrocketed prices of Lorcana cards since release. But despite this, you'd be surprised at how good of a deck can be built for under $100. This video will walk through 5 budget decks that are great for both beginners and seasoned players, as they can be great platforms for upgrading as we await some upcoming product reprints. Here are a few things I kept in mind while making the video, a couple of goals I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to show lists that showcase every ink color. I wanted to include and prioritize staple cards that'll be good in a variety of decks. I want to show deck lists that are easily upgradable, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily cheap to upgrade, but these decks typically only need to add in 3 or 4 cards, and they quickly become very competitive lists. And finally, I wanted these decks to be simple to pilot. A budget deck doesn't have to mean it's for newer players, but I did want these lists to be beginner friendly. These decks are great for sending to a buddy interested in Lorcana who doesn't know where to start, or it can help you know where to spend $200 to make 2 decks, one for you and your friend or one for you and your kid to play together. And for more competitive players, these lists give you a cheap skeleton that you can build off of. You can test out what you like and dislike digitally, and then go support Lorcana by playing in print once you know how you want to finalize your deck. I hope this video serves as a great resource in that regard. And as a quick reminder, please support Lorcana and your local game store. I think many stores will be getting some restocks this month, and Rise of the Floodborn is just around the corner. But with that, let's get to the list of my top 5 budget decks under $100. First up on our list is the incredibly fun Evasive Aggro deck. And if you look at a more finished list, you'll see how surprisingly close it is for such a cheap price. If you haven't tried out a deck like this yet, it's a simple one that aims to quest each turn and eventually get Cusco out and protect him with ruby cards that can ready him, such as Shield, LeFou, and Fan the Flames. The other stars of the show are evasive characters who will also be annoying to deal with as they quest, demanding some removal actions from your opponent. The deck does have some weaknesses, namely a lack of card draw, but building this as a budget deck is fantastic because it gets you a huge collection of great Emerald cards that can combo successfully with every other ink color. You gain at least 2 to 3 copies of the classic Emerald Curve with Flynn, Cheshire Cat, Tinkerbell, Cusco, and Genie. You can even manage 3 copies of that Cusco within our budget. And finalizing this deck into a more polished list is simple. Just swap out your 2-cost Genies, Peter Pans, and 1 Fan the Flame for your extra Cusco, Hans, Cheshire Cats, and 1 John Silver. So there you go, that's our budget version of Emerald Ruby Evasive. If you're interested in a more detailed look at this deck, check out this video I made previously going through the main list. Just know that I'd run Mother Knows Best over Dragonfire as an updated edit. Okay, this next deck is a little bit wonky, but stick with me. This is an Amber Steel Villains deck, which may seem a bit odd, but Amber is one of the most difficult ink colors to use on a budget, because every Amber deck wants 4 Rapunzels, which are the most pricey cards on the market. But this Villains deck leans on a much more affordable win condition with Hades King of Olympus. Not only are these under $1 as a single, but if you are opening product, you can find one in every gift set, which is why their single price is so low. And although Hades is far from a common staple, he's a fun card that can introduce players into card synergy, and he works well alongside a ton of Amber and Steel staples like Captain Hook, Prince Eric, 4-cost Hades, and to a lesser extent Hans 13th in line. This deck also builds off other great Amber staples like Simba, Cinderella, Rockstar Stitch, and Lantern, as well as Smash, Grab Your Sword, Beast Mirror, and Simba in Steel. It's a daunting task, but this deck can certainly transition into a more mainline Amber Steel deck with a few additions like those Rapunzels and Tinkerbell Giant Fairy. It's quite a bit more nuanced than just these exact changes, but this will get your deck going in the right direction, and you can decide to play more mid-range or aggro depending on your preferences. Also, I did want to mention, I think there's a good chance the Hades could grow into use going into Rise of the Floodborn, as we'll undoubtedly gain a few new villains to work with. We already know we'll have the Queen, as well as a few other fun Amber Steel cards. So if you've been itching to play Amber Steel, I think this could be a great place to start your deck on a budget. Next up, I want to include a list for control players, and although this is certainly more of a diet control deck, I think Ruby Steel could be a great choice, especially for someone wanting to grow their collection in a way that allows them to branch out in the future into multiple decks. This deck is a grab bag of fantastic staples with Maui, Aladdin, Shield, and Dragonfire, as well as Grab Your Sword, Beast, and one copy of both Whole New World and Mickey BLT. With 6 small Aladdins plus Shield and LeFou, you'll get plenty of practice with the Shift Aladdin combos, which are some of the best Ruby combos available. Don't neglect Whole New World, Beast Mirror, Simba, and Tinkerbell. They seem a bit weak, but with Ruby Steel, they're your key cards for drawing and seeing more cards, which is not only vital for this Ink duo, it's also a bread and butter playstyle for control that you can learn with this deck list. To upgrade this deck, consider picking up more Ruby control tools like Dragon Maleficent and Be Prepared, or Steel's ever-popular Giant Tink. Also, I do think Ruby Steel is a great framework going into Rise of the Floodborn, as we've seen a few really interesting cards so far that will likely really boost the popularity of this Ink duo. So that's my little control deck for under $100 in Ruby Steel. Go check it out. Next up, we have one of my favorite underrated duos, Sapphire and Emerald. I like to call this type of deck Ward Aggro because of its core 5-drops Cusco and Aurora. Cusco is here to continue his typical rule as the king of Emerald aggro decks, while Aurora joins to extend the Ward keyword to other aggro units like Tinkerbell and Mad Hatter. This deck has such a concentrated cost curve and low uninkable count that it's one of the most consistent decks available. And although it's a budget list, it's very close to the full list that's becoming quite popular even at top tournaments. In addition to some typical Emerald aggro characters, Sapphire adds in Aurora and Maleficent, as well as a couple copies of Let It Go and Eye of the Fates. To upgrade this deck, add in your final Cusco, as well as Flynn Rider and the final copies of Let It Go. It's also viable to include 6-cost characters like Genie, John Silver, or Robin Hood, but this deck is also very comfortable sticking to a 5-ink limit. If you've never tried the blue-green combo, take this deck out for a spin. It's a great one. And finally, our number 1 budget deck is this Emerald Amethyst Tempo deck. If you've seen my recent video on the Bounce Aggro deck, 95% of this list will look familiar. It's the same deck on a budget. And I think this solidifies Emerald as the most effective budget ink color by far. Again, the deck combines Emerald aggro staples with a second color, this time Amethyst. Amethyst brings great card draw and some disruption to the table, with great staples like Rafiki, Maleficent, Friends on the Other Side, and Befuddle. I do have that full video guide on this list, but as a quick and fast guide to upgrading the deck, swap out a few less impactful cards for your 4th Cusco, more Cheshire Cats, and the addition of 1-cost Maleficent and John Silver. Suddenly, with those small and relatively budget-friendly changes, you have yourself a really solid deck that has proven itself as a top contender against the best deck lists. Alright guys, I hope this type of video was helpful. Let me know if you want to see any more coverage of budget decks like this, or if you prefer the typical focus on meta decks and set 2 coverage. If you have any questions about these or other decks, please drop a line down in the comments or over on my Discord. I'd be happy to answer. Thanks for watching. Make sure to support the channel by liking and sharing the video. And you can support further by checking out merch at Narrative 6. This is a nerdy apparel brand that I run and create all the artwork for. But thanks for sticking around. I'll see you in the next video.